it got off to such a good start. It was released to a rapturous welcome in 1970, and a year later even featured in the 007 film Diamonds Are Forever. The body was a beautiful design by Italy's Giovanni Michelotti, and it had a smooth and powerful 3-litre V8. It seemed that finally Britain had a competitor for Mercedes SL. But almost everything that could go wrong did. Today they make great classics, and later on in this video we'll be looking at values and what you need to look out for if you're going to buy one. But first, let's go back to where it all went wrong. So finally, Triumph was really taking the fight to Mercedes. Its existing TR models were aging and were never really quite as usable as the W113 SL. The attack was two-pronged. They're going to use an Italian design body to outshine the Merc, and then a lovely big British V8 to overshadow the German inline sixes. In 1963, Giovanni Michelotti took a standard 2000 saloon. He shortened the chassis. For the back end, he used the Spitfire for inspiration, and the front was an all-new design which was eventually also used on the facelift 2000. Work, however, moved slowly. Triumph was really tight on finances at this point in time, and they decided to prioritise their bread and butter models first. Now, once deprived of the roof, the chassis didn't have enough structural rigidity, which is why they added the T-bar. Now, this has now become an intrinsic part of the Stag's identity. But if you look at the original Michelotti design, I do think that because of that, it's lost some of the simplicity and elegance that it originally had. This car comes with the hardtop, which I think suits it really, really well. Now, originally, this was supposed to run a Triumph inline six, but they realised they weren't going to be able to get enough power out of those to make it work. What they really needed was a V8. That would have been easy to sell in the American market, would have had enough power and given it the prestige that it needed. But developing a V8 for one car would have been incredibly expensive. So they had a great idea. What they would do instead is develop an inline four which could be used on all the lower range of cars. Then make it so that two could be mated together into one and therefore make a V8. However, in 1967 there was a further complication because Rover got absorbed into Triumph's parent group, British Leyland. The management as well that went on to head British Leyland came from Rover, so there was a lot of pressure on Triumph to just use the new Rover V8, the Buick derived one. The engineers on Triumph's side weren't keen. One of the main things is that the car was already behind schedule. I think at this point it had been 5 years into its design process. And they didn't want to have to redesign the car to accept the Rover engine. So they lied and said that it wouldn't fit. It was eventually launched in 1970 and to an ecstatic welcome. But trouble was not too far behind. First thing was that the gestation period, the design period, had been so long that by the time this was around, Merc already had an all-new SL, and that too had V8s. More importantly though, the Stag, more than any other car I know, was really afflicted by overheating problems, and this was due to not just one, but 3 unrelated issues. So firstly, the water pump was of poor quality. Not only that, but they had put it right on top of the engine. Now that means that if at any point the level should drop, either just over time through evaporation or because it got a bit hot and some water came out, it would immediately go below the level of the pumps and the coolant would stop circulating. This would overheat the engine, but also it would quickly lead to failure of the pump. So even if you topped up the fluid again, the car would continue to overheat. The next thing was that the cylinder head fixing studs were at different angles. So when the car heated up, it caused a twist in them, leading to head gasket failure. And the last thing in this perfect storm of overheating was that this had an iron bottom end and alloy heads. In itself, that wouldn't have normally been a problem, but the quality of the aluminium in the heads was really quite poor. As long as owners used very good antifreeze that was aluminium safe, it wouldn't have been an issue. But this wasn't properly communicated to dealers or owners. So they got electrolytic corrosion, which built up a white sludge that would block up the galleries in the radiator, causing overheating. Now that those weaknesses are known, Stags can be made to run very reliably. And of course, there are mods that help, like the raised header tank, which is on this car. That both increases the volume of the coolant and also keeps it higher up. But enough of that, let's see what it's like to drive. I love some of the detailing on these older cars. They're all different, and for example, the seatbelt catchers there, never seen them like that, and they just, I don't know, they're so period. Anyway, that's what this car is all about, and that V8. One thing I noticed earlier is this has power steering, and it makes such a difference to the ease of use when you're maneuvering around. It's just incredibly, such an easy car to drive this. I wasn't expecting that. The engine's a really torquey lump. Even at very low revs, you can feel that that's what it's all about. It just pulls off without any drama. The clutch is nice and progressive. It's a car that I think anyone could drive, so we're off to a good start. This is the manual, so it's a 4-speed but with overdrive. It's a little bit of weight to the throw and it's quite precise. It's really pleasant to use. The wheel and the pedals are quite offset, especially the pedals to the right. The wheel isn't too bad. But aside from that, the ergonomics are surprisingly good on this. So it has a really nice interior. You've got sort of leatherette everywhere, some nice wooden paneling on there, but all the heater controls are concentrated on the bottom there, which makes sense. Cigarette lighter and heater for the rear screen. For the lights, there's a rotary dial on the front, and then as usual, wipers are on the left, indicator and horn on the right. So it's all really easy, it's all pretty clear. The one thing that comes to mind is that there's a lovely panel there, which I love. It's like a cake sort of sliced up, and it gives you the lights for things like if you need fuel, for the indicator, the handbrake is on, but the slice for the oil is obscured by your hand when you're driving on the wheel, so the placement of that panel isn't really great. But apart from that, surprisingly good for a British car of this era, and the power steering really does make it so easy to drive. The ride as well so far seems very nice, very pleasant. It was quite a luxurious car for its time. If you start to consider that it has power steering, it has the overdrive, but also, I think not that common in the 70s, was electric windows. And these, very uncharacteristically for a Brit car of this era, move up and down with a surprising amount of enthusiasm. The engine on this one was rebuilt by Paul at Stag Classics, who has a great reputation. David wanted me to give him a quick mention, so here it is. And I'll put his details in the video description as well, if you want to go and have a look at his website. Let's see what it's like taken through the gears. David, the owner, mentioned to me that first and second, they're fine, but the synchro is a little bit weak, so I'm going to take care to try and change gear relatively slowly on those. By the way, I haven't mentioned it, but this 3-litre V8 produces in the region of 140 horsepower. Now I've just realised that all this time I've been in overdrive, so we'll have to do another pull through the gears to get a proper sense of what it can do. But You can tell it's not a revvy unit by any means, it's just torquey, low down. Very smooth though if you do want to rev it, but there just doesn't seem to be much point. It's a car which is geared towards comfort, and maybe that's no bad thing. It's quite practical, so you have decent room on the back seats for a little sports car. Also, the boot is fairly big, if not too deep. The seats are really comfortable. These are the original leatherette seats. This car has 59,000 miles on it, and there is paperwork to prove that. I can't believe that they have survived so long. The foam has been redone, but this is still the original vinyl that is on them. Okay, the overdrive is off now. Should really only be used in top gear. That was my mistake. I should have checked it before I went off, but let's just try and do another pull through the gears. Turning circle is all right, and are we ready? Look, it's muscular enough. I think it's just the kind of, and the steering, the turning is really nice and crisp as well. But I think it's just not the kind of car that encourages you to push it too hard. I think it works best driven at 7/10. So yeah, not a massive amount of feel really coming from the front end. On these corners as well, the brakes at least, it has a nice firm pedal, and look, it's not bad, it's not bad. So you're at 2,500 revs at 50, put in the overdrive, and that drops really significantly to 1,500 at 50. So I'd say that overdrive really makes it a good thing. The problem with the 3-speed auto box, although it might suit the nature of this, is that you don't have the benefit of that. So because you've only got 3 gears and top is quite low geared, it means that I think that you're cruising, when you're at 60, you're cruising at 3,000 rather than 2.5 with this. So that is a downside to that. There is though the option of retrofitting a Jaguar 4-speed that apparently makes it much better. So if you like the idea of a delicate, easy to drive classic from the 70s, but you're worried about the reputation that the Stag has for unreliability, I'd say don't let that stop you. By now, people are aware of the foibles of the engine. Many have been rebuilt or upgraded, and generally they can be made to be pretty reliable. There's also a good thing, which is parts, both for the engine and the car. They are readily available and they are cheap. Good quality antifreeze of the right kind is essential. Also, you need to be aware that the timing chains on these should be treated as consumables. They tend to stretch, so they should only be used up to about 25,000 miles. Now, whether you go for an auto or a manual, there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of difference in the values. To me, the manual is a more desirable thing. With this overdrive, it'll make it better as a cruiser, and it's also going to be a little bit less thirsty on the fuel. The classic car market at the moment is quite hard to read, but if we have a quick look at what's on right now, they seem to vary between 10 to 30,000. £10,000 will buy you something that will definitely need a little bit of attention, and 30,000 miles should be for a really mint car. This one is a lovely example. It's had both a repaint, the engine has been rebuilt. I really can't fault it, and it's lovely to drive too. Now, there is one example in the classifieds that I saw at £5,000, but you can tell even from the few pictures that there are that it's going to need significant attention because of rust. So I would encourage you to spend as much as you can. I mean, that always applies to any classic that you're going to buy, but I think particularly here, you want to get a well-sorted car. If those overheating issues haven't been looked at and you're going to inherit those, that will really be a pain, so you want to avoid that. So we talk about lost opportunities so often with the British car industry, but I think with this car in particular, just think of what it could have been if they went ahead with the Rover V8, or just if they had sorted out this engine a little bit better. I mean, overall, it's a really, really great car. If you want to see a video on a more traditionally hairy-chested Triumph, check out this one I drove, this TR5, from a few months back. Thank you to David for bringing this down. Thanks to all of you for watching. See you for the next video.